Telling a story is easy. Telling a good story, on the other hand, is difficult no matter what format you're working with. There are so many different aspects to this process you have to take into consideration that'll either drive your audience's attention deeper in or further away, but there are so many of them that trying to cover them all in one video would turn this short rant into something resembling a low-budget documentary, so instead, I'm going to be covering them one at a time, starting with today's topic. Pacing, and how it's a problem not only facing the people who made the game in the first place, but also the player themselves, so enjoy.
To best explain how pacing works, imagine an action movie that was one non-stop chase scene. Non-stop. As in, the entire movie, 70 minutes more or less, from title card to credit sequence was constant high-energy music, explosions, guns, and cheesy one-liners. This would be a very boring movie, because it only knew how to do one thing, which, over the course of an hour or so, only succeeds in wearing out the audience. The brain gets tired of the exact same stimulus over and over. You need to break up that chase with context, establishing scenes, and, you know, an actual human dynamic. But the opposite of that is also true. Now imagine a movie that featured nothing but two characters in a room talking to each other, and not about anything interesting either. They muse about the weather, what books they've been reading, one of them leaves to get a coffee for 5 minutes, you get the idea. If there was a relationship between these two, some kind of connection or conflict, it would immediately give reason for the audience to pay attention. This is pacing. Constant conflict, or too much of it at once, will only cause your audience to leave with a headache, but no conflict, or too little of it at once, will cause them to leave 8 hours later when they wake up. Naturally, video games have their own unique challenges on this front, and it all stems from the fact that they're an active art form. As the designer, you will never have 100% control over where your player will be at any given time, so the trick is trying to guide them into naturally pacing out the experience on their own. One game that does this incredibly well is Bayonetta 2, which sounds weird considering that most people will tell you they like it because it's non-stop action. The truth is, though, that's just the part they remember. Rarely will a stage in Bayonetta begin by immediately dropping you into combat, and even when it does, there's always a short cutscene to get you ready for it. And when that battle ends, peace. You're given free reign to walk around and do whatever you like in the environment, with only a results screen to slow you down. There are tons of highs and lows in the action, and when you combine that with the fact that new enemies, weapons, stage types, and puzzles come and go so frequently, you can describe the gameplay as anything but stale. Then you transition back to the chapter select menu. Notice how not much is going on here. There's not a whole lot of information to process as opposed to the stages, where there are a million meaningful choices to make every second of combat. There's also the music, which, like the stages themselves when you're not fighting something, has just enough energy to be interesting without being bombastic or blood pumping. But the neutral stages and chapter select menus aren't the true lows in the interest curve. They're only the transition periods, because from them, you could just as easily go back into another fight or start another chapter right away. No, the humanizing scene of Bayonetta 2 is when you go to the shop. Not only is the smooth jazz here even more chill than the stages or the menu, but it has even less info to keep track of. Rodin doesn't even have animation for the most part. He's always presented in still shots. And of course you're gonna go here from time to time, because it's how you unlock more options in combat. Platinum knew that the player's natural desire to make Bayonetta more powerful would lead them to the shop from time to time, and because shops boil down to a simple menu anyway, they chose for this to be the point where the player can cool off for a bit and get mentally ready for more fighting. That way they could keep making the stages as over the top as they liked without having to worry about tiring out the audience. And the change in tone doesn't feel jarring either, because the only times the player can access the shop is either outside of combat or from the chapter select menu. Speaking of the non-combat sections of stages, collectibles are scattered all around these areas, and most of them are pretty strong motivators to wander off the beaten path, such as extra health and magic power, as well as pieces of new weapons. Most of them are also hidden behind mini-challenges like platforming sections or time trials. Some of them are hidden so well that merely finding them is a challenge unto itself, and there are so many of these, especially early on, that you might end up running into one or two of them by accident, which makes them even more satisfying. Oddly enough, humans react even more positively when we don't expect to get a reward for doing something, which also plays on the idea of breaking up mental routine. And all it takes is that one accidental item to get you hooked on searching every nook and cranny for more. Or not, because that's the cool thing. Bayonetta 2 is so well balanced, you don't need any of this extra stuff, so it's one more way you can set your own pace. But one of the most important parts of this player-writer dynamic, and this is going to sound really weird at first, is not just creating an interest curve that makes people want to keep playing. It's about making one that gives them plenty of opportunities to stop. Because, let's face it, not everyone can devote their entire day to trying to get a meaningful experience out of their games. It's about crafting your work in such a way that a long play session can be just as rewarding as a short one, or at the very least, making sure you offer your player plenty of in-case-of-life break glass points. Going back to Bayonetta, every completed chapter offers a great jumping off point, but in case you absolutely need to put down the controller, there are plenty of checkpoints in every stage, meaning you won't be too far from where you left off when you come back. Not only does this give your audience peace of mind, but it should do the same for you as well, because... look, let's not beat around the bush about this. Stereotypes may not be law, but they have a root in reality, and there are games out there that have ruined people's lives. Games that don't respect their players' time, attention, heart, or soul. That don't offer anything deeper than a Skinner box designed to use anyone that picks it up as an engine for play. But as games like Loneliness and Brothers show, that's not something inherent to the medium. As a designer, that's entirely on you. You can choose to create actual art that affects and enhances someone else's life, if even in the smallest way, or you can choose to prove anyone who condemns this medium just for existing right. Studying psychology is probably the closest you can get to a quantifiable theory on art, and even as far back as ancient Japan, we knew this. There's an old folk song in that country about a man who visits 3 lords, and tells them of a bird that won't sing. The first lord says to kill it. The second tells the man to just wait, but the third says, make it want to sing. Now, which one sounds like the most reasonable party to you?
Video games are a fantastic challenge for writers because unlike most other mediums, you and your audience are not mutually exclusive. You each have a hand in how the story is going to unfold, so figuring out ways to help them get you to do it is part of what makes this medium so much fun to work in the first place. But none of that matters if you haven't even captured their attention long enough for them to get to the nitty-gritty of the game at all. So tune in next week when we'll be talking about video game openings and how Shovel Knight, if you haven't played it already, in which case, why not, is the perfect example of how to grab somebody right from the beginning and never let go. See you then!